We are very pleased that Heather has agreed to share some of the work that she's been doing at AGI. She is an education and outreach specialist. She works in the workforce department with Christopher Keene. And I guess with that, Heather, take it away.
Great, thank you, Pranoti. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about a program that I've developed over the past year. It is called AGI's Geoscience Careers Roadshow. Basically what I did is my colleague Abby and we traveled around to several different institutions along the East Coast, and we talked with geoscience departments, with students, geoscience majors, undergraduates, master's students, and PhD students, as well as the faculty members in those departments. And we really talked to them about geoscience careers, but not only about, okay, what are the types of jobs out there, but we presented some data on some of the workforce trends, some of those statistics to give them a little bit of background and context. And we really wanted to hold a discussion about how to think about the geoscience job market differently. So to do that, we really wanted to engage the students and the faculty as well. And a lot of the key aspects about this presentation, about really this discussion, is how to make yourself marketable as a geoscientist. You know, we all know that there are a lot of different types of geoscience occupations out there. And sometimes it can be really hard for students to really pin down, okay, well, what do I know how to do? What are my skills? And so we're really trying to teach them how to make themselves marketable and really emphasize the importance of transferable skills. And so during these discussions, the central piece to our discussions is this image here. I'll give you a second to look it over. Basically, what we want to do is help students and faculty think outside of the box when considering a geoscience occupation or thinking about the workforce in the geosciences. And so what you're looking at here is how we're trying to represent the geoscience workforce as a whole. The 5 circles in the center, those represent the different types of geoscience sectors in which geoscientists are employed. And so, as we know, we can work in a nonprofit, as I do. Obviously, we can work in academia, government, etc. And so those are the different sectors. Now, radiating out from those circles are the wedges, and these represent the different fields of interest, the different disciplines that really are encompassed within the geosciences. And so where these wedges intersect the circles, that indicates where these fields are employable, like within the different sectors. So as you can see, policy, for an example, is often found in industry, it's often found in government, and definitely found in nonprofit. And so that's just kind of how you read this image. Now, within the wedges, these are example occupations of what types of jobs you can hold as a geoscientist who is working in policy or who is working in business. And so this image really served as the central component, the central piece to the Roadshow program. Now, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background to exactly what I was doing to help facilitate these discussions. You know, I asked students, you know, what are some of the geoscience careers that you currently know about? What are some of your outside interests? What are some of the skill sets, etc.? And so what I'm going to talk to you today is how I effectively engaged the students and the faculty, and what were some of my successes, some of my hardships, I guess, and just my overall experiences. And then I'm going to open up the floor to all of you who are participating in this webinar, so that way we can share your experiences. And so first, how did I engage the students? As you all know, if you've given presentations before or been talking in front of a class, sometimes the students can be a little bit timid, a little bit shy, especially with guest presenters coming into their institution. And so what I did really first to break the ice is, before the presentation ever started, I just talked with students informally. It really helps students open up, get to know me a little better. I just ask them, you know, about themselves, you know, what's your name, what do you do? And so that way it kind of lightened the mood a little bit before the formal presentation actually started. Now, afterwards, when we did start the presentation, if the group was small enough, what I would do is have them go around and introduce themselves. So, give us your name, your major, what are you studying, and why did you choose to study that? That seems pretty simple. But what was interesting is that some of the smaller departments, a lot of times the students already knew each other, and that seems pretty obvious. They were very comfortable talking in front of one another, and that was no new news to them and to their peers. But it really helped us understand who we were talking to, who our audience was, so that way we could really tailor our discussions to really fit their needs. Now, with some of the other departments, which I'll touch on a little bit later, some of the students were not terribly open. They were very hesitant to talk, and oftentimes the students didn't even know each other. And so I'm going to get into some of these different examples from my experiences later. But overall, I really just wanted to encourage the discussion, because you're not going to learn much about geoscience careers if you don't participate, and if you don't really tell me what you're looking for and the types of things that you're interested in. And so to really encourage discussion, students needed incentives, and the best way we could do that is by throwing candy at them. And so it kind of lightens the mood. Students would have to go and try to catch the candy. We'd hand it out, and then that way it was kind of like a fun, open atmosphere, and that's really what we were striving for. Now I'm going to go into some of my observations from my travels. So the biggest thing that I noticed was that no matter what institution I was at, each department was very, very different, and they differed greatly. So even though I may be at somewhat comparable institutions, the departments themselves were always very different. Now, I tried to get a good sample of different types of institutions. So I went to a local community college, I went to state institutions, I went to like really small colleges, I went to prestigious Research 1 institutions, and I even went to an Ivy League institution. So as you can see, there was a good variety there for my sample. Now, the departments themselves, as I said, were very different. Some of the departments were extremely supportive, and the students were super, super engaged. I remember this one department that I went to, the students actually had a great variety of what they were studying. I talked to students who were studying geoscience policy. There was a student in there who was studying geomedical science, and so she was looking at how does geology and geoscience relate to the medicine field. And so that was really awesome. And when I would talk with them about that infographic I showed you a couple minutes ago, they were really engaged, they were excited, and the faculty members participated, and it was a great experience. Now, on the other hand, I also went to some institutions that were pretty cold, actually somewhat critical of the material I was presenting, and rather disengaged. I remember I went to, this institution was a state institution in particular, and I tried to open up discussions beforehand, and the students were kind of snarky. I even had one student basically say to me that he wasn't really giving me very much credit because he thought I was a little bit too young to be able to give him advice on a geoscience career. So I thought that was interesting because I was only a year older than he was, so he didn't really think of me as someone who could help him. And so that kind of set the tone and the atmosphere for the entire presentation. That particular group also, it was like pulling teeth to try to get them to participate. We handed out candy. We basically called on people point blank, and they just were very cold. And even the faculty in that institution were very disengaged. So that was an interesting experience. It made me a little bit more nervous, and I don't know how that reflected on their views, but it was definitely a very interesting department atmosphere. On the other hand, so my other institutions, the faculty were absolutely amazing. Like, the faculty would come in the middle of the presentation and be like, oh, you know what? I remember that happening. I would present information on workforce trends, and in particular, there's this graph about when the oil market collapsed. And so a lot of the geoscientists fled the discipline. And so I'm trying to tell some of these trends, and some of the professors be like, oh, I was a part of that. I remember that. Here's my story. And that was awesome because it really allowed the students to become fully engaged in the conversation. They could relate back to their professors, and it was just a great experience. And so when the faculty were super supportive like that and would like put in their own anecdotes, it really helped the department atmosphere in general. On the other hand, there was one institution that didn't even have any faculty attend. That's not true. I had one faculty member attend my presentation, and he basically said, I am the head of the department right now. I am obligated to be here, but if I wasn't the department head, I would not choose to be here because I don't normally come to these things. And I found that to be very interesting, and he told me that right off the bat. I'm like, I wonder how his attitude really reflects on the students. You know, do those students kind of pick up that similar mentality? And in fact, I kind of observed that they did. The students didn't find my presentation terribly important. Now, I don't know if it's because they thought that they were very well networked and they already knew how to get a job. They already knew that their faculty members were going to get them a job eventually once they finished their degree programs or what, but they didn't really find too much value in that, and that was kind of reflected in their faculty members' statement to me. And so that's kind of what the second bullet point is saying. How did these factors reflect a sense of community between departments? And so what I found was the more supportive the faculty and the more that the faculty participated, the more that they were engaged, the better the students were. The more the students participated, they asked better questions, they were engaged, they were friendly, and most of the time after my presentation, students would come up and talk to my colleague and I for half an hour sometimes afterwards, asking questions. Oh, well, how do I do this? How do I make myself marketable? What is your advice for this? And we had some of the faculty members come up and say, you know, this is a great program. The material you presented was so on point. It was really helpful for students, really hands-on. It was awesome. But then at some of the colder departments, faculty just left. One department, they didn't even thank us for coming. They all just left the room, and we kind of had to shut down and show ourselves out. So I found that the department atmospheres were extremely different. And so I found that when there was poor faculty attendance or poor participation, it was a very uninviting atmosphere. It was tense and cold. And the students actually didn't really get too much out of it either, because I don't know if they were taking on that sense, that atmosphere as well. So those are just some of my own experiences from my travels. What I would like to do now is really open this webinar up for discussion. I see that we have 3 attendees, which will really make for some good in-depth discussion here. So what I'd like to do is open this up and start off with some guiding questions, but really I want to encourage you to really take the conversation wherever you'd like to go. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unmute each of you, so that way you all have freedom to talk as long as you have a microphone. And at this point, I highly, highly recommend putting in earphones if you have them available to you. It'll reduce the feedback quite a bit. So I'm going to unmute Joel, Matthew, and Renee. So now you guys are all able to talk. So let's start off with the first question. How do you think, from your experiences, how does department size influence the department atmosphere and the sense of community? Do you have any insight into that? Joel, how about you?
In my experience, it's a little bit easier to develop community in a smaller department, but I'm actually in one now, which is in sort of a transition period and nested in a larger department. And I think we're at the point where we need to start building up community again. So I guess even in small departments, depending on the personnel and sabbaticals and all that, you can have what seems like there ought to be a sense of community since it is so small. Even there, it can be lacking if it's not worked on and built up.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think is going to help your department build that sense of community? Do you have any ideas?
I'm only second-year faculty, so I'm trying to figure that out. That's why I'm participating in these.
Okay.
Going off of the last webinar that was in this series, thinking about trying to do some more field trips with the whole department to build department camaraderie.
Yeah.
At my institution, there are a lot of transfer students. And so I think we need those outside of class experiences because people don't necessarily come through as a cohort and take all their classes together, which can kind of build community informally.
Yeah.
In a small department where people are residential or go to the same institution for all 4 years.
Definitely. Nice. Excellent. Matthew, do you have any comments about this? Oh, he has a question he may not have. He has no microphone, but he says, but he finds challenges in departmental community with his own smaller department. That said, most of his faculty and students are very busy, with many students working outside of the classroom. So there is no time for those things. No time for extracurricular. I'm trying to read the chat box, sorry. No time for extracurricular activities, and they're challenging. Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, what happens when a lot of your students have to work outside the classroom? I mean, what time is there to build those extra events and things into the room? Definitely. And Renee, do you have anything to say?
Well, I'm a brand new faculty at my university. This is only my second semester, so I am still trying to find my way around the university with the students. I was also in attendance for the one about field trips, and so I'm trying to integrate field trips more with my students and look at different ways to do that. But I think for me right now, the most important thing is just meeting the students still and seeing them. I'm an instructor, so I'm teaching the intro classes mostly, so meeting the majors. This is my first semester to do that.
Okay.
So I'm trying to find ways to be able to get us all together. Most of our students are commuter students and are not on campus as often as those who might live in the dorms, so we face that issue as well.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So in your opinions, how do integrated departments' atmospheres differ? And by integrated departments, I mean departments such as earth and atmospheric sciences, or geology and geography departments, that type of thing, where you kind of have 2 different subsets or 3 different subsets of geoscience in general. Does that, having a department like that, influence the atmosphere? What do you think?
So I guess I'll go first again.
Okay.
I'm actually, the Geosciences where I am is in the Department of Physics and Astronomy.
Nice.
So that's, I think it differs a lot from a typical department. And while the faculty all get along quite well, I think it's a little bit challenging to build up student camaraderie because the type of students who tend to major in physics tend to be very different than the types of students who major in geosciences or environmental sciences.
How do you find them to be so different?
Well, they don't like each other all that much.
Really?
Physics is bigger in my department. That's a bigger component of the department, both faculty-wise and student-wise. We had a really good group of seniors that graduated last year, and they sounded like they had tried to hang out with some of the physics majors, but they're just very different approaches to life in the world, and they're interested in much different things, and so it's almost like there's 2 separate departments, really.
And actually,
on the same floor and everything.
Yeah, actually, I feel like I can relate to that a little bit. For my undergraduate degree, I went to the University of Colorado, and I was an astrophysics major. And so I ended up switching from astrophysics to planetary science, so I was still in the astronomy department, of course. And I found that it was funny because when I started switching to planetary and taking more geology-based courses, my friends would be like, "What? You're coming back down to Earth? You need to like keep looking up." Like, and they kind of made it like, "Oh, well, you're taking the easy way out," or, "Oh, we don't like those rock people." And obviously they were my friends and they were just joking around, but I kind of got that sense that you were just describing. So I think if I were starting off as a geology major trying to take some classes, I may have had a little bit of pushback, which is kind of interesting. I never thought about it before. So, Renee, do you have any insights from any of your experiences about integrated departments and their atmospheres at all?
Our department here at University of Arkansas Little Rock is not integrated, but I graduated 2 years ago from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the geology, and we, of course, were earth and planetary sciences, and then structure also had a little corner of the world in the adjoined but building next door. The earth sciences students didn't seem to talk to the planetary science students, and the planetary science students didn't talk to us, and structure stayed apart as well. So, and planetary and earth sciences, we were only a floor apart. So, but we all pretty much stuck with our own little groups.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now I wonder how, if the students had started talking to each other, I wonder how that would have changed the dynamic, if at all, you know?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lori Sutter just came on the line. Lori, if you have a microphone, I'm just going to go ahead and unmute you so you can participate in the conversation. Lori, can you hear us?
I can, thanks.
Great.
Sorry for my delay. I got sidetracked.
Oh, that's okay. If you have any headphones, I would recommend you put them in because we're getting a little bit of feedback from you.
Okay. Why don't you just mute me then?
Okay.
Thanks.
And wait, if you'd
I'll
like
type
to
if I have any questions.
I'm sorry?
I can type if I have questions, and maybe you can unmute me at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good.
Thank you.
All right.
So this is Pranoti. If I could just make a quick comment. Before I came to AGU, I was a faculty member for many years, and I was in an integrated department. Excuse me, I was in a geology and geography department, and I remember some of what you all were talking about. But I think it was not until we started having different types of events in the department, be they field trips or other social events or beginning of the year pizza parties and supporting the student club and things like that, that the students actually started to kind of respect each other, because the geology students thought, oh, these are geography students, they're just taking these soft classes, and the geography students would say, well, these geology students, what do they know about GIS and things like that. So it was just this little bit of a war going on. But I think over time it certainly helped to have all these different curricular activities, that were taking place outside the classroom, that really helped to build the community in my department, my former department.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, for my master's degree program, I went to Purdue University. It was the Earth and Atmospheric Sciences department, and now it's the Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Science department. They recently changed their name. But what I found when I started my master's studies there, that the atmospheric students and the solid Earth students did not really talk very much at all, just like how other folks were describing earlier. And over the course of my 2-year program, I made some really great friends up in the atmospheric sciences department. And it really only took a couple of my friends and I to build those relationships, and then all of a sudden the department basically merged together because we all became great friends. And we ended up, going out together. Or I had one of my great friends, she was an atmospheric science educator, and so she and I would sit and help each other write our theses, and that moral support. And so, like, that really brings the students together. So I think if students initiate it too, it can really help with those integrated type departments. Are there any other comments at all about this particular question? If not, we can move on to the third one. What role does the institution itself play in shaping the department and the department's community? Do you have any insight on that? You know, are there differences between a community college situation versus an Ivy League and that sense of community within the individual department? What do you guys think?
Or perhaps if you're in a position of being a department chair, Matthew, I think you're a department chair. Perhaps you may have some insight into this. You know, is how your department is viewed. You know, as part of the institution. Does that help?
I don't think Matthew has a microphone.
Oh, okay.
So he says absolutely. Nice.
So I guess let me rephrase the question slightly differently. So for instance, Joel, you were talking about, you know, doing field trips and things that might be happening in your department. How does how does the word get out, you know, outside your department? How does, you know, the dean find out? You know, does the department chair go and talk to the dean, or are you folks get featured in the alumni magazine, or, you know, do you have a student newspaper on campus where things get written up? How do you advertise what your department is doing?
Well, we don't yet, I mean, because that's something I want to do in the future. As I mentioned, I'm in my second year, so that hasn't really happened yet. Our dean is certainly supportive because he himself is a geologist.
Oh,
and our department chair, who's a physicist, is very supportive of building community within the geoscience students and recruiting, but we're sort of at this point trying to figure out what are the best ways to go about it with a lot of transfer students and a lot of commuter students. Mm. So the institution is supportive, but the type of students at my institution definitely shapes what we can do to form that community.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know from my experience at Purdue, my department was actually housed in the civil engineering building. And so we didn't have our own building, so a lot of students on campus didn't even know we really existed because we were housed in civil. And so I actually had one student of mine, I was talking with him, and he said, yeah, like, he was a civil engineer or an engineer in general, and he was in the civil building for a class, and one day he either took a wrong turn or he stumbled upon, like, our wing, and he was like, what is this? I've always been interested in volcanoes, and then all of a sudden he was like, you know what, I'm switching majors, I'm sick of this engineering, I'm switching majors, and I'm going to be a geologist. And so it was really the visibility of our department at that time. I think that was a little bit hard, so promoting it, promoting your programs, your field trips and stuff like that obviously would make a great difference. And I know at least at my time at Purdue, our visibility was pretty low. I don't know how it is now. I think it's gotten a lot better. And I think that the sense of community, you know, definitely kind of relies on how visible it is in the rest of the institution.
I think that, Joel here, I think that's something we as a department, or I as a member of the department, needs to work on. And I have a student who's in my introductory geology class who's environmental studies, going to switch over to environmental science. But we had a pizza lunch a few weeks ago and invited people from our introductory classes and our people who've already declared that they're geology majors, just to talk about advising in classes, etc. And this student said, oh, I didn't even know you could actually major in geology at my institution.
Yeah.
So I think we definitely have a lot of work to do in terms of getting the word out. And it's good to hear, I guess, that that is consistent and that something, you can make a positive change pretty quickly by doing that, getting the word out more effectively.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have you been able to brainstorm any strategies to help promote your department program yet, or are you still kind of like thinking about it?
Definitely still thinking about it. I think once the semester ends, I'm going to sit down with a couple of my colleagues and try to map out a plan for the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely.
How about using alumni? Have any of you used alumni, or do you see alumni, for those of you who are newish faculty in your departments, have you seen alumni coming back, being invited for any kind of events, or big football games or big sporting events and things like that, where people seem to rally around that kind of stuff on campuses? Have any of you had that kind of experience in your department? You bring the alumni back to talk to the students, and they sort of talk about what courses they took and how it got them where they are today and things like that.
We just recently had a speaker who was finishing his PhD in New Zealand, but in the almost year that I've been here, I believe that's the only alumni that has returned.
Wow, that's interesting.
So was there a great interest in listening to what this student alumnus had to say, and what kind of event took place in your department?
It was a seminar, an afternoon seminar, so it was fairly well attended, but not overly attended. And here at the university, we don't have a football team. I think we have a basketball team, but otherwise, we don't really see the alumni at all.
Interesting. That was a great question, Cindy.
This is Bethany. When I was in grad school, we actually had the alumni come back fairly often, and I found it very helpful as a student, and then actually went back and talked myself once I had graduated. And the piece that was really useful for us was definitely the career piece, because being in DC, there were so many options that it was sort of like there were tons of options, and yet at the same time you didn't really know which to choose or how to navigate, applying for federal jobs if that was the route you wanted to go. And so it was really helpful to have people who had been, a student in the same place as you and then gone through that process come back and talk about, how they did it and how they navigated it.
Yeah, I agree, actually. And I think having alums who are somewhat similar in age, who have basically recently gone through the experience, especially in this economic climate, we just went through this process. We know how difficult it can be. We had some luck, obviously, but at least we have some idea of where to look and how to get a job. And so I think those personal experiences and anecdotes are really helpful for students. And it even, increases morale as well. There are a lot of positions out there in the geosciences. You just have to know how to get them and where to find them and who to talk to. So I think bringing in alums and people with that type of experience can help students brainstorm a little bit and talk amongst each other, really get them thinking about geoscience careers before their last semester, before they graduate, and that could actually help influence if they're all kind of working together. Oh, well, where are you looking? That might actually help influence the department atmosphere a little bit as well, in a small way, I suppose.
Yeah. This is Pranoti. I was in my former department for over a decade, and so I was able to see things as they were changing. I'd been there long enough. It turned out, towards the end of my tenure there, we actually brought one of our alumni back, and she was able to serve on the advisory board for, the College of Science and Technology. And so that was nice to have that, former student sort of provide, high-level, advice and things like that to the dean. So that was really, really powerful. And it gave, geosciences sort of good representation, in the dean's eyes. And, if you belong to an alumni board, you're very important. An advisory board, you're very important. And everybody takes your advice seriously. So I think, and it also helped that person, endowed a scholarship and things like that. So that we found it very useful to stay engaged with our alumni. And over time, we had, lots of things that were happening on our campus where we invited, first of all, we started keeping a good track of, where these people were going. And then also making sure that if they were local or if they were in the area, we would, meet up with them. Another way to meet up with them was also at, when you go to a GSA meeting or an AGU meeting. So anyway, I just figured I'd say that.
Yeah, definitely. Matthew just typed in the question box. He said, I am in the process of setting up an alumni advisory board as part of the departmental advisory board, and this can be very valuable for engaging both the students and the alumni. I think that's definitely a very good point.
Matthew, this is Pranoti again. By the way, if you're coming to the AGU fall meeting, we're going to have a presentation on forming advisory boards and things like that at the Heads and Chairs workshop. So save the date, December 8th. It's going to be part of the program. So it would be lovely if you could join us.
Thanks. Are there any additional comments, or should we move on to the last question? Or are there any other questions you'd like to pose? I mean, this is an open conversation.
So I have a question for Pranoti.
Yes.
Wondering how they kept track of alumni and kept in contact with them. Is that something we haven't done at my institution much, but something I would very much like to do?
Yeah, that's really
in the future.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a great question. It's a lot of work. It was easy to do for the recent alumni, the recent graduates, because we had other students in the department who were friends with them. They had overlapped over a couple of years. So we were small enough that we could find out, so did so-and-so get that job that they were interviewing for and things like that. We set up a page on the home page where students could send their updated information. And we had a faculty member who was charged with the web page, was very detail-oriented and was able to, track that level of detail and constantly keep things updated, so that helped. But also we worked with the university foundation and alumni house and all those organizations that they have on campus. So we wanted to get back to the alumni who had, the students who had graduated, a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And so we worked with those entities on our campus to see what the latest address was that they had and things like that. And so rather than say, hey, we'd like to ask you for money, we said, we're having, well, I was in the South, so there was a big football game. There's a homecoming football game. So are you going to be in the area? We'd love for you to come and visit us. We have a breakfast and things like that. So I think at first it just started out as come see us if you happen to be in town. And then we got them really engaged in having a very sort of rigorous programming. So in the beginning it was just have breakfast and then go see the football game or have lunch or whatever it was. And then it became, oh, you're alumni, you're coming back, would you give a talk to the students? So we'd have one, or two former students that gave talks. Then there was some other, programming that took place before everybody went to the football game. So it just evolved over time. But it took a lot of work, not only on part of the department chair, but also, making sure that the faculty came to these events. The students would show up. Would they or would they not show up? It was free breakfast on a Saturday morning, but it was at 9 o'clock in the morning. Will the students show up? So,
that sounds rough.
So anyway, but now, you can use different, social media and things like that to, probably keep better track of these types of things. So.
Actually, that's a good question. How do you guys think social media shapes department atmosphere?
And Matthew just typed in something, they use, you can use LinkedIn to generate a departmental web page and things like that. So
yeah, definitely. LinkedIn is a great tool. Are there any other ways other than LinkedIn to really engage students and stuff? What do you guys think?
How about many of you? You're obviously an alumni of some department. How are you keeping in touch with your former department? Maybe that's something you could use to model how you want to do things in your own current department.
I don't keep in contact with my own department.
Oh, okay.
I think once a year they send out a newsletter. But that's it, as far as I know.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the other thing we did. We resurrected a department newsletter. So it was a whole bunch of things that happened in conjunction, and the faculty recognized very early on that, you needed to do more than one thing because, not everybody was local. They're not going to come to this football game, or there were some that just liked to hear from you once a year by a newsletter, and they'd send their check, if that's what they were interested in doing. So over time, we did a whole bunch of things, and I think that collectively sort of helped to engage the alumni back in the department, and that ultimately, built community. It made contacts for those current students with those former students, because they heard real stories about how they had gotten in their current position and things like that. So I'll admit I don't keep in touch with my former department because it just doesn't exist. It's a geology department that was died. Let's put it this way.
It did? Oh no.
Yeah, I was at the University of Connecticut. They don't have a geology department. I mean, now they have something else, but
Interesting.
so they don't send me a letter asking for money. So
Yeah, Lori said that she said, I'm afraid I'm terrible at keeping in touch with formal departments as well. Yeah, and I think, honestly, I don't think that that's terribly uncommon. I know that I actually keep in pretty close touch with both of my former departments, mainly because of my position here at AGI, because it's my job to reach out to the community, to provide services, to really keep everyone informed and stuff like that. So I talk with old faculty in my department at Colorado. I definitely talk with folks at Purdue, where I had my master's. So maybe that's not the norm. I don't know.
Joel here. My undergrad department recently started a Facebook page, and that's been, a good way to kind of keep in contact with them.
Yeah.
And I taught a couple of times from my undergrad institution at the field camp, so I've kept up pretty close contact with my undergrad professors over the years, but I think I'm abnormal in that because of my set of experiences after I graduated.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, and I wonder if Facebook pages and Twitter and those types of social media outlets, if they're more effective with students who are, say, between 30 and 35 and under, or alums who are 35 and under. I wonder if there's more participation through those outlets, and how that. Yeah, go ahead.
There definitely seem to be a lot of people from my undergrad institution who are in their 50s,
Mm-hmm.
farther along into their careers, who are definitely seem pretty engaged on Facebook.
Nice. Yeah. I don't know if my department has a Facebook page. Something I should probably look into. Because I definitely still have friends within my department. And I wonder what they're up to, or, if something's even going on. It's a really good point.
Well, I think if you have a Facebook page, like my undergraduate and master's university they have a Facebook page, and I've been their Facebook friend now for 2 years, and I think there have been maybe 2 things that have been put out on that Facebook. So I finally got to the point I just dropped them as a friend, in the sense that it was inactive, nobody was doing anything, nothing had ever been updated.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think if you have a Facebook page, keep it updated, put stuff up there.
Yeah, I wonder if that was one of the students' initiatives, and then they ended up leaving or graduating, and they left it, and no one was there to take it over.
I think that it was actually the person in charge of it was the department head. In fact, she was very active, and she's still the department head, but has put nothing on there.
Ah, interesting. So why don't we move on to the last question. How do department atmospheres differ depending on geographical location? Do you think that's even a factor that influences how departments and students interact with one another? I don't know if I can say anything for sure.
This is Bethany. Having gone to a tiny rural school for undergrad and a big urban school for grad school, I mean, one kind of obvious difference is in if you're doing activities as a student group, the sorts of things you do, depending on where you are. So when I was in Maine, we might go hiking which actually we did here too in DC, but in DC it was more like, we'd go hear an interesting speaker at a museum or something like that. And then another kind of plus or challenge is how many students live on campus, how mobile your student body is and whether students are around, outside of classes or if they're really just coming in to go to class.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Last month's webinar, we had one presenter who was from California and one was from, Virginia, Pomona College and College of William and Mary. And while they're very different departments, there were lots of similarities and things they were doing. But I think it all sort of tied ultimately to not so much where the departments were located, but what it is they were doing. They were clearly very engaged departments because of all the things that the students were doing as well as the things that the faculty were doing. So I don't know. I wonder if, the geographical location may have anything to do with it. But I agree with Bethany's point, how I mean, it depends on the students, too. You could sort of do a lot of things, but if the students don't show up or if the students are not motivated to join the activities, then it's not going to happen.
Or even the culture of the region, too. I wonder how that plays into things. If you're taking a department from the Deep South versus someone from Northern California versus from, the New England area or in the Midwest, So I wonder how the differences in culture across the United States, how that shapes department atmospheres, students, how they interact with one another. Something to think about.
Well, our students here at UALR, like I mentioned at the beginning, are mostly commuter students and are a little bit older as well. They're not, 18, 19, 20 or so. Our average student is in their late 20s. They have families, they have kids, and so they don't very often engage in things on the weekends or in the evenings because they're with their families.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you think that makes your department seem a little bit more disjointed or, with independent groups of students as opposed to one cohesive?
Very much so.
Mm.
However, the faculty, we all get together to go to baseball games and movies and dinner and all kinds of things, but we can't seem to engage the students.
Interesting. Yeah, so I wonder what are the role of faculty, and the faculty's interactions with one another, and I wonder if that ever plays a role with how students interact, too. So in your case, it seems almost opposite because the faculty seem very close and the students don't.
We're all going to a baseball game on Saturday.
Nice, nice. And that almost kind of speaks to some of my experiences too, because when I went to some of my institutions for the roadshow, some of the faculty were not engaged at all. They didn't talk to one another, even as faculty members. One may not have even recognized most of the faculty there because she was an earth scientist and the others were atmospheric scientists or something, and so they didn't really talk with one another, and that particular department was the one that was very cold and unwelcoming. So it's interesting.